Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, RB Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the recent support and viewership on our content. And before we get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so this week we've had, a couple of crazy matchups. I guess we'll start off with the one that we kind of just, finished looking at. We are just taping right after, and it's Cavs OKC. This was the rematch right after, the last week we had Cleveland taking the first matchup between the two. This time, OKC in Oklahoma City got their revenge, 134-113. This time without Isaiah Hartenstein, who since then is going to be out for at least a week with a calf injury. And Chet Holmgren is still out. Caruso did come back and played well in the minutes he played. This was basically a beatdown. I know they won by 20. They were up by as much as 38-40 in this game. And it was basically over at halftime. I mean, midway through the second quarter, you could just see it. I mean, OKC's defense pretty much took Cleveland out of everything they tried to do. And in this game, the three-point shot was falling for Oklahoma City. They finished shooting 34% from three, but for most of the game, they were at or above 40%. SGA leading the way with 40 points, 8 assists, 2 steals. Just another day in the office for him. And then you look at Lou Dort with 22, 6 of 9 from 3. That's a big factor. Jalen Williams with 19, 5 and 6. Pretty solid in this game. He kind of sparked the initial run in the second quarter when they extended the lead up big, right? Because SGA started the second quarters on the bench. And then everybody else just kind of chipped in. No one else really had any crazy offensive outputs. It was mainly a defensive showing where you can kind of see with OKC why they're the number one defense. They turn, their defense into offense, getting steals, getting deflections, even without their two big guys, right? Jalen Williams, the center, he started at the 5. But just as a whole, it's just kind of a reminder of how great this team really is. Just the fact that, they've been for most of the season without one or both of their bigs. And they've still been able to play just as well, right? With or without them, right? I mean, they've only lost 6 games all season. And, it's a big testament to, what they can do on both ends of the floor. Like I said, mainly defensively, but then you got the superstar in there as well. Really, with OKC, they're good enough to be able to win the title. It's just a matter of come playoff time, can Jalen Williams be a legit number 2 guy on a championship team? And sometimes you don't know until it happens, right? Like last year, clearly wasn't quite ready, along with a lot of the rest of the young guys. But this usually happens in steps anyways, right? Like usually you don't have a young team come in and win the title right away. We did have them winning the series, and it was still a close competitive series. But, for those who didn't pick Oklahoma City, right, the lack of experience, some of the matchup issues in terms of the size and rebounding, that's kind of the issue why. They've, helped kind of correct that with Hartenstein. The fact that they were able to add him and Caruso for nothing, crazy. I mean, I know they traded Giddey for Caruso, but like still, you were basically swapping guys. And Caruso, when he's healthy and he's played, he hasn't shot well for most of the season, but you can see when he's hitting the shots, like, that the fit is really good, right?
Yep.
Like it works a lot better, I think, than the Giddey fit. But for them, again, I kind of like the fact that they also just went in with the mindset of, we know we lost to this team last game, in a game that was pretty competitive and close. So this time, let's flip the script. Let's go in, and you could see it. Like they cut to the timeouts, and you could see SGA, really hyping everybody and his team up. It was pretty cool. Just as a whole, the growth for them, I think is pretty significant. I do kind of wonder if they see themselves as a buyer. Like, will they actually make a trade? Not that they necessarily have to. I do wonder what happens there. And then from a Cleveland perspective, bad night. Right? I mean, like, they couldn't get anything going. OKC pretty much shut everybody out of the game. Garland had a good game. He was pretty much the only guy. I guess Allen had a couple of, moments where he was solid. But by and large, nobody for Cleveland really could get going. And just the fact that OKC didn't have their big guys and they were still kind of able to limit, what those guys were able to do. It's pretty impressive. I mean, the threes, Cleveland shot 31% from 3, 13 for 42. Again, some of it skewed because of the garbage time numbers. But, Cleveland's been the number 1 offense in the NBA. And we kind of saw the last matchup, right? Some of the problems that OKC was having with the two big lineup, and it did not happen in this game. And again, to be fair, both of these teams are very good. So you kind of expect that, you don't expect one team to kind of just run away with this matchup. Um, but just as a whole, this was kind of a cool showing between two teams that, have the two best net ratings and have played the best basketball all season in the NBA. So, again, this game not quite as entertaining as the other one, but from an OKC perspective, if you're a fan of the team or if you're, if this is your pick to make a deep run, you got to feel pretty good about what you saw. And the fact that OKC as a whole has played pretty well against a lot of the top teams. Like they beat Boston, they beat the Knicks. Obviously they beat Cleveland, not twice, but they beat them once. They did lose to Milwaukee in the cup game. So there is that factor. But, just as a whole, they continue to kind of show that they're, I think, the most dangerous team in the Western Conference. And, again, SGA is probably at this point the favorite to win the MVP award, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Oklahoma City, definitely this was a huge statement win for them, obviously. The way that they kind of came out full force through the first half and pretty much solidified the win right there. But, I think they did a great job of just taking Cleveland off schedule. They didn't let them really dictate how the game was going to go, because that's normally what happens with Cleveland games. Like, they are the ones who set the tone very early. And, I think that might be the danger of this team, of Cleveland, that is, where you might not feel too high on them come playoff time, because I think they're a team that might be one of those where if they get off schedule, they might not even get out of the first round. Because I think, they clearly were bothered by the amount of defense. They didn't really let them get a clean shot off, just all over the place, like you said, swarming defense. So, that's where I think a lot of the skepticism does come in from Cleveland's perspective. But, Oklahoma City, you just have to tip your hat to what they're doing, because, if we're talking seeding, number one seed, all these wins are just continue to rack up. And the numbers that Shea has, yeah, MVP, he would have my vote, if we could vote. So, and I think there still are questions. Like, they're not a invincible team or, unbeatable team. Like, we already know their weaknesses. They don't have a tremendous amount of size. But it's funny, in this game, there were multiple times that Cleveland kind of played down to their level of size and still weren't able to do anything. So I think that kind of speaks volumes to how versatile they can be on both ends of the floor. Because, yes, they are very good on defense, but offensively, I think they're very slept on, just because a lot of their volume does come from one specific player. And you're kind of looking at J-Dub, can he take away, some pressure from Shea? Because I think that's kind of what people want. Like, people don't want J-Dub to be like this insane player or anything like that. I think they just want him to be a reliable star that can take a lot of pressure off of Shea. And I think that's what he needs to do. That's what he needs to become. And I think that will kind of solidify how I feel about Oklahoma City. But yeah, in this game, like, they did everything the right way. Efficient looks, defense all over the place, got to the line as well, as per usual. And yeah, the coaching is also solid, standout coaching.
Yeah, I mean, again, with the Jalen Williams thing, again, it's all about, can you be a number two when it counts in the postseason? Because we know that there are going to be games in the playoffs where maybe not necessarily that SGA doesn't have it. I mean, of course that can happen, but just like a game where, like, you need one more guy to get you over the hump. It can't necessarily just be, because, like, obviously Lou Dort was kind of the other guy in this game, but, there may be a game where it's like, those two guys, and if you can get Jalen Williams as the number two guy, that can get you over the hump. Could be Chet Holmgren on a night. Obviously that's the nice thing about having the talent that they have. The way they use Caruso is pretty cool, just how they use him as a roller. Obviously he was hitting his shots from three right in the corners. So, and again, we haven't seen much of him either for most of this season. He's been hurt. So, again, the fact that two of their main acquisitions have not played a ton of basketball for them this season, and they're still able to kind of just run away with it, I think is, a pretty good sign that this is truly an elite team. Like we said, it just all kind of comes down to what happens in the playoffs. And for Cleveland, again, it's a bad night. You're going to have those type of games in the regular season, right? Like, we can get into Boston momentarily, right? But, like, just as a whole, every team is going to have, like before this game actually, recently, right? They had 2 games against Indiana, one that was a win and then one that was a loss, right? In which Halliburton got hurt.
Mhm.
So, it could just be it's the point of the season where, you know, just that type of stuff is going to happen. I mean, for Cleveland, the wild part is, again, the minutes of most of these guys are relatively low. They're all playing, barely over 30 minutes a game, right? And the fact that they're able to do that and still get a ton of wins, that should help them in theory in the playoffs too, because they should be pretty well rested and fresh, in comparison to maybe some of these other teams where their main guys have to play a ton in order to get those type of wins. But just in general, again, I think people for both of these teams, despite how good they've been, both teams pretty much at this point, like for probably a lot of people, they're kind of like in the show me range, right? Because both teams got to the second round, so they've clearly taken improvements from their previous seasons. But just as a whole, it's just kind of the factor of even with Boston, right, who had been through multiple deep playoff runs and had gone to a finals before, right? It's just the factor of like you just kind of have to show it. You kind of have to take those bruises and everything. So both teams, I think, are kind of in a good spot with that. It's just a matter of again, come playoff time, will they be able to do it? And the thing for both of them is they're both the 1 seeds, and they'll probably keep the 1 seed. So the good news for them is, we'll say like from a perspective of Cleveland, you don't have to play a team like Boston until the conference finals at
Right.
the earliest, right? It's like Boston's probably not going to be able to get the 1 seed at this point. Um, and if they're 2 or 3, that's when they play them in the conference finals, right? And then if you're OKC, obviously, kind of like the East, the standings aren't quite set in stone, but just as a whole, a team that maybe OKC doesn't match up as well against, you may not see those type of teams until again the conference finals, right? Like say, if let's say the playoffs were legitimately today, they'd be playing Minnesota possibly in the first round,
Mhm.
right? And like, OKC, even though Minnesota has a lot of size, like it doesn't really seem like it's bothered Oklahoma City a ton, right? Just from the perspective of, what we've seen from Minnesota this year. So, again, like the fact that you're getting all these regular season wins is great. And it puts you in a really good spot for the playoffs compared to some of these other teams that are going to have to sweat their way into the playoffs, and they'll kind of be able to cruise in. So it's a good thing. It's just it would have been nice if we had gotten a more competitive game,
Yeah.
but over the course of a regular season, that type of stuff, is going to happen.
I
But
think
it's just yeah,
because I did want to add one thing to this whole Cleveland versus Oklahoma City thing. I think this game also kind of showed us how important home court is. If you're a
Mhm.
hardcore fan, you already know how important home court is. But to the average viewer, I think this is a huge signifier because the previous matchup was in Cleveland, and Cleveland took that. But if both of these teams can secure that number 1 seed, then they don't have to really. They're going to have home court advantage. So
yeah.
against every team that they play. So that's the beauty in that. So I think that is kind of an eye opener for
Mhm.
both these teams.
Yeah. And for OKC, that this win was important because, it makes it tougher for Cleveland to just automatically get home court advantage. I mean,
Right.
Cleveland has the better record right now, but let's say they have the same record, right? They don't have the automatic, in
Yeah.
season series
Yeah.
tiebreaker, right? Like there's other tiebreaker scenarios
Hmm.
that have to come into play first. So for them, their records are almost the same, right? Like Cleveland's 34-5, or I guess now 34-6, and OKC's 34-6.
Hmm.
So it's going to be a race to who gets that best record between those two teams, and that could be something that not as many people talk about, but by the end of the season, it could be important because, like you said, if OKC or Cleveland secures home court and they happen to meet in the NBA Finals, right? Then that, like you said, that could be the difference between winning and losing it. I mean,
Yeah.
when you look at their home and road records, like both teams, I mean, neither team loses a lot anyways, but
Hmm.
both teams at home have only lost twice, right? OKC is 17-2. Cleveland's 20-2 at home. So
Yep.
obviously, home court, you'd like to have it. Clearly, they've shown they can win on the road. But like you said, and we've talked about it before, like home court advantage does help because, your role players usually play better on the road, or excuse me, at home. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if you can get that, that's huge, especially,
Yeah.
for the younger-ish teams, right? You never know. Not that every team has to have it, right? Like Dallas played with no home court advantage at all, right? But they were able to get to the finals. But just as a whole, you'd like to have it, right? You don't necessarily want to have to play a bunch of series on the road if you want to win the title.
Yeah.
And usually you don't necessarily have to anyways if you're like a top
Right,
three
right, right.
seed
Yeah.
normally.
Yeah.
Unless you're like unless you get to the later rounds and you're
Mhm.
playing like say you're a 3 seed and you have to play the 1 seed or something like that or the
Yeah.
2 seed.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, good game. Not really, but I mean just as a whole, um, kind of a
Good
wild scenario.
takeaways. Good takeaways.
Some cool takeaways, yeah. And again, like I don't want to make this like a bad thing about Cleveland. Like it was a
Mm-mm.
bad night. I'm still high on the team in
Yeah.
terms of their
We're
chances of
not
being
selling
able.
stock.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
No
Like
shot.
like yeah, exactly. Like Mobley wasn't good in this game, but that doesn't mean that like oh I'm out on Evan Mobley.
Right,
Like
right.
it's one game.
Chalk it up to a
And
great
again,
night from OKC, bad night
yeah,
from freaking Cleveland.
exactly. And again, for OKC, they understood the assignment because they went in and they, again, they, reclaimed the matchup from
Hmm.
the last game.
Yeah.
Um, but another team that's in a little bit of a different spot, the Celtics, right? So, they started the season off, playing pretty good, right? I mean, I think they were basically like what, like 18-3 or so to start the
I
season,
think
and
so.
now they've basically played 500 basketball since, right? Somewhere along those lines. 6-4 in their last 10. Just had a bad loss to Toronto. Again, this type of stuff happens over the course of the season. I think last year they had a game where they lost to the Lakers, right, without LeBron and AD, and they still ended up cruising to the title. But they have not played as well as of late. The shots haven't really fallen. Derek White has kind of just not played as well all of a sudden recently. And again, I know some guys have had some illnesses, but like, you look at his last several games, barely struggling to get in, barely getting into double digits, like 2 for 9, 1 for 6, 1 for 8, 4 for 13. Tatum obviously has played really well. And Porzingis since he's come back has been good. But, what is this? Like what are we
Mm.
seeing right now? Cuz it obviously it doesn't quite feel like what we saw last season. And I'm willing to kind of just give a little grace and say, hey, they won the title last year, and they're probably maybe they're just kind of cruising through the regular season, and just kind of just getting by to get by. But obviously for the Celtics, the issue is that the road to the title this year is more than likely going to be much tougher because of the fact that the East is better. You're probably not going to be the 1 seed at this point. And the teams you play in both conferences will probably be better than they were last year and presumably maybe healthier. But, are we worried about the Celtics, right? Is there something going on here, or is it more so just kind of mid-season rut, basically, that they're just going to have to kind of just find a way out of?
Yeah, I think this has potential to be a pretty good conversation because, me personally, I think that they're under the spotlight a little bit more this season.
Mhm.
I last season I think they, we knew what they were. Obviously we knew how special those guys were, but this year I think they've got a lot more working against them than they did last year. Not even just in terms of like the quality of play and like the quote unquote cupcake walk and cupcake ring that they had and stuff like that, but yeah, like you said, the East is a lot better. You're not the number 1 seed at the moment, and I think that might be pretty frustrating for them. But at the same time, like you said, they really could just be, giving themselves that leeway of, yeah, we won the title. All right, let's just save ourselves for postseason. But, granted, me personally, I didn't think they were gonna back to back. Like I said, I picked the Knicks, but I don't know how that's gonna shape up, in the finals or come to the postseason. But you know, they're such a good team that at times you kind of wonder why they do struggle. I'm not really sure. Statistically, I guess there has been a fall off from last year. I think Tatum's been pretty solid. I think his play has been tapered off a little bit as of late, but nothing too crazy where I think it spells doom or concern. But I think just collectively as a unit, they're probably just taking their time. Like I said, there's more eyes on them. Being the defending champs, I think they just have a multitude of factors working against them. Like you said, the quality of competition is a lot better. And yeah, you're playing up against, some different teams, and a lot of the league has changed, I think, a lot since last year as well. Like teams are really playing differently, and they're trying to not necessarily emulate what Boston does, but trying to keep up. And I think teams have actually done a pretty good job this year of keeping up with what Boston was able to do last year and this year. So and I think Cleveland is like a perfect example of that. I think New York has done it, Milwaukee as of late. There are teams that are pretty much hot on their tail, and I think that is kind of concerning because I think, if you're the Celtics, you probably ideally wouldn't want to be 6-4 in your last 10 games. You'd probably want to be around that range of Cleveland, 8-2. And maybe like, have a bad night here and there, but it seems like it's really 50-50 with the squad. And I don't know what that is. Like, I don't think it's the superstar play. If you want me to be real, I don't think it's Tatum. I don't think it's Brown. I just think collectively they've got to kind of relock in. But yeah, they're just under a magnifying lens, I think, is what's really going on here. And Cleveland's just playing better at the moment.
Yeah, kind of concerning, but I think I am willing to kind of chalk it up to it's a slump.
Mm-hmm.
It's the middle of the season, and it's just like just something that they're probably just gonna have to kind of find a way out of, and maybe they get it, through during the stretch, right? Like they play teams like Orlando, right, which is kind of a tough team to play even with their injuries.
Sure.
Atlanta, right, Golden State, Clippers, Lakers, Mavs, maybe probably still without Luca. Houston, so they have a number of matchups this month that I think it'll be kind of interesting to see how they respond since they have been slumping a little bit. And I think that'll probably give us a pretty good measure of what's going on, because presumably if it's just a slump, it should probably end within the next couple of weeks, right?
Yeah.
So by the end of this month, if they're still kind of playing 500 basketball, then yeah, that's probably where it's time to start being kind of worried. But if they kind of get back into the swing of things by the end of the month, then it should probably be fine. And I'm gonna assume by the end of this month, it'll probably be good. I mean, again, I think the 1 seed is out of reach, but they should still presumably be at the 2 spot. But the Knicks, they're pretty close behind them. They're only a couple of games behind. I know Towns now is hurt, although I think he's still expected to play with the bone chip in his thumb, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But again, like that should be something if you're the Celtics, you should probably try to play for. I just wouldn't want to drop all the way down to 3, because once you
Agreed.
drop down to 3, that's kind of where you're in that weird tier of like you could play any of those teams in the first round that just fall by like a game. Like, like say Milwaukee loses the last couple of games and they drop to like 6. Not saying that it's going to happen, but it could.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then you play a team like Milwaukee in the first round, right? Or you play, a team like, I don't know, the Magic or Indiana or something like that. I just wouldn't really want to be in that position. I'd prefer to be 2 and then, have, play against one of those play-in teams, which are, worse, I think, than the teams in that 4 to 6 spot.
Yeah, I had a question for you because I know Boston is your pick to win the finals.
Right.
Do you think they're in a similar situation as Denver last year, where being the number 2 seed might work against them?
I mean, I think it can, just from the perspective of it becomes harder just because you're going to be playing presumably some better matchups and you won't have home court. I, you know, I, I'm not, Boston's a different team,
Mm-hmm.
from the Nuggets, but
Yeah,
I think that's definitely something that could for sure be an issue just because it just becomes harder. But you don't have to be the 1 seed in order to win the title. It's just kind of something
agree.
that's nice to have. And to be honest, you know, that happened last season, but not every team that wins the title has been a 1 seed in the last several years.
Yep.
Some of them have been, but it's not a necessity. You got to be at least top 3, I think.
Yeah.
But I think that's the main thing for them is they did run it back. So in terms of like player additions, there's nobody they added that made them better. It's more so just earlier in the season, right? Everybody was still playing at a really high level, and now some guys have started to drop off. Like if Derek White goes back to how he was playing earlier in the season,
Mm-hmm.
then that can probably help, right?
Yes.
If Jalen Brown's shooting splits go up a little bit, then that can probably help. So, that's why it's probably just something internal. It's not something where like, I doubt that there's anything that they really do at the deadline, just
Mm-mm,
because
mm-mm.
what are they going to do realistically to, to kind of put somebody in there? I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to continue to roll with their guys and, just see what happens. And again, like they're a 3-point shooting team. So if the shots aren't falling consistently, well, then that's going to hurt their offense at different points. So, you know, it's tough for them, I'm sure, but I'm not really too concerned yet. I think it's just something, just to just kind of pay attention to, just because again, there is a reason why we haven't had a team win back to back in quite some time, and
Yes.
it could just be too difficult, right? And there could just be second year fatigue. I'm not sure, but it's something to watch for, because obviously this will be a much tougher assignment, a tougher test for them than last year, because they won't be the one seed, and may not have home court in the finals, right? I mean, like, because if OKC's there, you're not getting home court there either, because they've already beaten them once. So
Yep. Yep.
yeah, so I mean, just kind of an interesting situation to be in. And then we kind of flip the script, and there's another team that's in, not so good of a spot in the Eastern Conference, right? The Philadelphia 76ers, right? They've lost 4 in a row, 3-7 in their last 10. They're on a stretch in terms of their schedule right now that's pretty tough, right? Like, people have mentioned, for most of this month, they have been playing and will play teams that have winning records, and several of them are on back to backs, right? Like, they just completed a back to back against Oklahoma City and the Knicks, lost both of them,
Hmm.
both without Joel Embiid. But I believe Maxey and Paul George played in both of those games, but it just still wasn't enough. They're going to play another back to back against Indiana and Milwaukee. Um, then they'll play the Nuggets. Then they'll play a back to back against Cleveland and Chicago. Then a back to back against the Lakers and the Kings. And then they finish the month off against the Nuggets. So this is pretty much, probably the stretch where we're gonna find out, like, whether or not they may even get in to the playoffs play
Mm.
in, because they're still in the 11th spot, and they're only 2 games back, but they are 9 games below 500, while the Bulls are 5 games below 500. Now, the Bulls are on a 3-game losing streak. They haven't played as well, so it's not insurmountable. It's just the problem is now, when we assume that they might be able to get into that 7-8 spot, 9-10 might be it at this point, right? Because you look at the teams in the 7-8 spot, not that they're going to hold, but just those teams are still above 500 for now, and they're almost, and by the end of this month, if the Sixers can't manage to win the majority of these remaining games this month, then they're going to be 10 plus games under 500. And that's probably going to be it for them this season. Just from the perspective of, that's just too much ground to make up, where you're going to be in the 9-10 spot. And then even if you get in, then you got to play Cleveland. And I just don't think it's in the cards. Joel Embiid's got a different injury now, right? Where it seems like it's a foot. Paul George hasn't really been good, has not been happy about playing center. But just, I don't know. It's been pretty much just a disastrous season for this team. And we talked about it at the beginning, where, you know, we were kind of, like, I didn't completely write them off, but we were kind of the mindset of, like, this is probably close to a lost season for them, even when they started off, whatever it was, like 1-10 or whatever, terrible start it was, because you just have to make up so much ground, where it was like, yeah, you got to win like 10 games in a row just to get above 500. And, we're halfway through the season, and it's still basically the same thing. And, a couple of guys that were bright spots, like Jared McCain, he's not coming back. His season is over. We hadn't even mentioned that with the torn
Yeah.
meniscus. And he
Right.
had a really good year, as a rookie for them. Um, and it's not looking too good right now for that team, because I don't know what I'm getting from Embiid. He hasn't played recently. Even in the games he's played, he just doesn't look the same. I mean,
Hmm.
offensively, he can still score and get to his spots, but, like, he just doesn't move the same, mainly on defense. That's a problem, because you need him to be really good on both ends of the floor. And, just the pieces and the Paul George signing just hasn't worked. He just hasn't been good for them. And, he's got a 4-year max contract, and he's probably not going to get better from a year-to-year basis. Now, maybe you could say the injury he had in the beginning of the season set him back, and that's more than fair. But it's just not looking too good for, the Sixers right now. And I would pretty much say at this point, I'm out on them. Like, I just don't think that there's really a realistic way for them to turn it around. Maybe they get to the 9-10 spot or play in or something like that, but that's probably as far as they go, I would say. I think this is pretty much a lost season for them, which, sucks, because this was a team that I think, when they are healthy, we were relatively high on, but you can only go but so far, because you can't really trust them health wise. And that's pretty much been the case this season, albeit an extreme one, but still.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I both kind of saw this coming. Almost immediately when Paul George joined the roster, we knew that Embiid was going to have health questions, always has,
Mhm.
and we knew that Paul George was going to have similar questions because he always has as well. But coming off of last year, I think Paul George's play throughout the regular season was freaking phenomenal. For his age
Yeah.
and what he provided to that team. It's just the postseason, obviously, completely different story. But the taper off has been horrible. It's
Mhm.
one of those seasons that reminds me of like the like 2021 2022 Clippers year where like he only played like 30 something games. So
Mhm.
it's giving me shades of that on worse efficiency and worse numbers. So that's already a bad sign. Embiid, like you said, is definitely still reeling from the fact that he was playing hurt last year, hurt through Team USA as well. Just kind of a similar situation to I think Halliburton, where just never really had that full time to completely rest and rehab and get everything back on track. And coming into the season 100%, a lot of guys don't even come into the season 100%, but I don't even think he came into the season like 80%. It might be like 70 something. And then asking Tyrese Maxey to pretty much carry the load is disrespectful in my opinion because I think it hurts his development. Because I think you and I were kind of under the assumption if Paul George and Joel Embiid can play up to their standards, then Maxey can be that team that piece that elevates the team because his play should get better as well. But that hasn't really happened. It's kind of been a regression in the efficiency,
Mhm.
kind of a stagnation of the stats. It's just rough. And, great player, but obviously his development is definitely going to be skewed a little bit because the season is lost. I think we like the majority of their offseason acquisitions. Yabu Sele's been sick, like
Yep.
awesome. One of the best acquisitions for sure, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, it's just not enough when you're dealing with injury after injury. You don't know who's going to be starting. You don't know who's going to be playing, who's not going to be playing. You never know. And, I don't know. It's rough, but like I said, when I first started talking, I think you and I both kind of saw this coming when we saw a team that has so many injury concerns. But yeah, I think like you said, like you mentioned with Jared McCain, I think that's also another piece that has really hurt them as well because he was not necessarily keeping them afloat, but I think giving them a glimmer of hope where you're like, okay, well, if he can play better than Paul George, we're gonna have a chance.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think this is probably a lost season, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just the Sixers are just looking forward, right? It's just going to be something to watch, just because again, you would think, say, like you go into next season, right, and maybe you hope for better health, but is this team going to be better than the next season? I mean, like they're young guys, maybe they could be better, but you're still going to have the same concerns, from your older guys, just in terms of age and injury concerns. Like from for Paul George, right? Like I mean, again, the numbers are what they are. He doesn't really get to the line too much anymore, so I mean, he's kind of just been just mainly settling for tough jumpers, which he has made, but now he can't really get to the rim as much. So
Yeah.
again, could just be related to the injury from earlier this season, but that's kind of the problem in terms of that's why it's just so hard to buy stock into a Philly team, just because they just you just can't really rely on a lot of those guys. So
Agreed.
it's unfortunate, and they had to kind of do this, but that Paul George contract may start to look really bad once you get into year 3, 4, just because of the fact that then he'll be what, like 36,
Yeah.
37,
Right now, I
you
think it's
know.
the second worst NBA contract in the league right now.
Yeah, so just absolutely brutal for them. And like I said, at this point, I would say you might as well sell your stock on Philly if you had any, because
Yeah,
I
agreed.
don't see it for this team this season. Like this
Mm-mm.
has just been a disastrous season, a lost one, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
they'll get them next time.
Then you look at the Miami Heat, 5-5 in their last 10. They've lost, a couple games in a row.
Mm.
Jimmy Butler, by the time you see this episode, he may be back for the Miami Heat. When we said he may not be back and play for the Heat again, still a trade has not occurred. Um, and obviously he had that 7-game suspension, but it's coming to an end. And you look at the games that they had played. in his absence, right? The last game he played was that Pacers game. So since then, a loss to the Jazz by almost 40, a loss to the Kings in double overtime, and then a 3-game win streak, right? A blowout win over the Warriors, a close game over Utah, and then a blowout win over the Blazers. And then 2 losses to both LA teams, one without Bam against the Clippers, one with Bam against the Lakers, right? Where they were up for most of the game and couldn't hold on at the end. So, kind of a mix, I guess, right? 3-4 in those games. I mean, Hero's been pretty good. Bam, the offense is just so bizarre. I don't really know what's been going on this season from that perspective where, because I think we thought, and we talked about it when we were on those Heat podcasts in the summer, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
kind of talked about like Bam, he looks like he might be taking a leap. And we saw in the Olympics what he was able to do. Far from it this season. Like I said, I'm not sure what's going on. He's taking threes, I guess, and the 3-point shot has been all right, but everything else has been pretty much just below his standards. I think he's not going to be on the All-Star team for sure. And Hero honestly has probably been their best player this season. I think, so that's kind of the good thing for him is his stock has certainly gone up, right? Where he's giving you basically 25, 5, and 5. He's been healthy. He's been productive. He's he looks better, so that's good to see. They don't really have a point guard like the Rozier acquisition just seems like it hasn't worked out. The Thomas Bryant trade, right, has worked out for both teams because he's played very well for the Pacers and has kind of helped, get them kind of back on track. But then it's also opened up playing time for Khalil Ware, right, their rookie center. And in the minutes he's played, he's honestly been pretty solid, right? He's gotten a lot of opportunities as of late for that team. And you can kind of see, why people were kind of interested in him, right? Just kind of the things that he kind of brings to the table, some 3-point shooting, some athleticism, some shot blocking. Obviously, still plenty of room to grow. But for the Heat, this is kind of what you would like to see, just in terms of having a young guy out there. Jovic is getting playing time. He's played pretty well. So, kind of an interesting situation, but obviously you still have the situation of Butler still isn't traded. Maybe he comes back. I don't know. I don't know if they're going to just suspend him again or if he just plays. He's not on the injury report right now. Usually would just say suspended. So that's not been the case. But, what do you think of this situation? Just because, again, like nothing's really changed. The teams that maybe were interested still haven't really come closer to a deal. Miami clearly, obviously, doesn't want to just be, kind of fleeced in a deal. So is it possible he just stays?
I don't buy that he stays. I can't see that happening. Like I said, I think we talked about it last episode where I feel like too much damage has been done from both sides where, the drama has escalated to the point where, in my opinion, a lot of this stuff really shouldn't have even been public. But I think that's just the way that, certain individuals operate. We know how Jimmy operates. He can be messy at times. He's done it multiple times in his career. And we definitely know how Pat Riley operates. He's done it multiple times in his career. So it's like, I'm not saying it's like an ego clash, but that's kind of what it feels like, and I think somebody's got to go. And if anything, I think Miami would probably be willing to let go of Jimmy Butler more so than, Pat Riley. But at the same time, I do empathize with Jimmy Butler because I think there is a certain level of disrespect that has been that line kind of has been crossed in my opinion because I think he's done a lot for that organization. So at the very least, you should take care of him. But it seems like they really don't give a crap. And I think you do have to shout out the team in general playing through all this. The news, the rumors, the drama. Answering the questions properly and stuff like that. And like I said, or like you said, I think it's beautiful that Tyler Hero has found himself on the basketball court. It's pretty sick, I think, because, after the rookie season, people were like, nah, he can't really replicate it. He doesn't play defense, doesn't even give you enough offense. But, now that he's on fire, it's pretty sick to see that.
Yeah.
And then, I think there's a lot of positives, but they're being overshadowed by the negativity of the whole Jimmy Butler thing. And I think that's where you kind of feel like Jimmy's probably got to go. It's just kind of like on what terms though, that's I think the question that everybody wants to know the answer to. And I don't think we're going to find out until probably around the deadline. I don't think it's going to just happen out of nowhere. I think it's got to be like a deadline day kind of thing. You know what I mean? Where
Yeah, I mean, I
not
go
like a
back.
team is going to swoop in, but one of the teams
Right.
that's mentioned is going to cave. I feel like they have to.
Yeah, I'm back and forth on this pretty much
Hmm.
every day, just
Hmm.
because it's like a perspective of which team is going to do it, what are they going
Right.
to give up,
Right.
and that's the tough part here. But at the same time, like you said, it just feels like, given how it's gone, it's kind of hard to envision like a comeback from that. But again, I guess the question is, do we expect him to be playing
Mm.
Friday? Friday night against the Denver Nuggets, like, or do they just kind of just
Hmm.
set up a new suspension, or kind of just something else?
Yeah, that's the tough part because I think it all depends on what perspective and what lens you're looking at it from. Because I think there is a possibility where he can get his value up a little bit more by playing, but at the same time, if he doesn't play, then I think that clearly means that he wants out and they want him gone. So I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm gonna probably lean towards the latter, where he's not gonna play. And like I said, both parties mutually want to part ways. Um, with all this drama. But yeah, that's kind of where I don't think he's gonna play.
Yeah, you think they just hit him with another suspension, or he just
Yeah, or
doesn't?
it could, like you said, it could go either way, and that's the crazy part. Like
Mhm.
I think the suspension could be warranted to a degree because, like you said, when it was first kind of revealed what on earth he was doing, where you're pretty much intentionally playing like dog crap, that's
Yeah,
behavior detrimental to the team or whatever. I don't think that's acceptable at all. But then, I don't know. You
yeah,
just gotta. It's a rough situation. It's one of the more bizarre situations that I think we've been fortunate enough to cover or talk about. So
yeah.
it is
I mean,
weird.
again, and there's blame on both sides, and that's
Yeah.
kind of the funny part in all of this, right? Like, now you kind of get leaks about, like, oh, Jimmy Butler did this, and
Right.
take
Right.
separate blames or whatever, and then other times it's like, then it's like stuff about what the Heat didn't do, for Jimmy Butler and things like that. But
Yeah, wasn't it like
I
they
don't know.
complained? He complained about like role
Yeah,
player. What was it? Thomas Bryant and Richardson. Like those
yeah, stuff.
signings weren't enough. But then with the
Right,
flights thing, like I didn't like the headline surrounding that because I think key details were left out. Because
right.
I think if you watch, what was it, Starting Five? I think that was the docu series or whatever that they did on
Yeah.
Netflix. His
Yep.
father was sick at the time, so I get that 100%. But the fact that all this information is just being leaked is just dirty, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, there could also be a scenario, honestly, where like it may be best for him to come back and actually play.
Hmm.
Like, just from the perspective of, like, if he can show, that he can still do some stuff and kind of
Right.
be a good soldier, then that might actually help boost his
Hmm.
trade value for some of these teams. And then that might be a little bit more skittish,
Hmm.
on it, versus him just kind of just being gone. I mean, again, I can see both sides, of this perspective, but, it's just tough. Like, I'm just so 50-50 on this, just especially with the new CBA. It just makes these deals a lot harder than they used to be, right? Just like, because a lot of times in the past, you could just be like, yeah, we'll just do this and, kind of worry about it later on. But now, clearly, like, some of these teams are more skittish about it. And I think that there are teams where, like, hey, if you're the Grizzlies, I mean, yeah, I mean, I would take a swing on it just from the perspective of, like, just, you could give up some of your, other depth pieces and just see and roll the dice with Butler. But, they may not want to do that, so that's kind of the issue going on there. But for some of the other teams, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, if you're the Kings, why
No,
in the world
no,
would you do
no.
that? Like,
Oh.
if you're the Rockets, I think you're just kind of better off riding it out with your young guys and see what you got.
Hmm.
Um, and then Golden State, I just don't think it matters a whole lot for them. So it's tough, but we'll get a resolution, like you said, probably. I mean, we'll know, right? Within like 3 weeks or so,
Yeah,
what's gonna happen,
it's
because the
coming.
trade deadline. Yeah, the trade deadline is basically in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And, once it gets here, we'll have a pretty good sense of, I think, what's going to happen. But there's
Hmm.
clearly a lot of things going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Denver Nuggets 7-3 in their last 10. And that's with some of these injuries, right? Aaron Gordon kind of being in and out. Westbrook has played great, but also another key cog, Jamal Murray, right, has had some more big games as of late, right? Obviously, they just lost to the Rockets without Jokic, in fairness. So, there's the factor there. But, in the last game against the Mavs, Jamal Murray had 45, right? And looked, pretty good. Now, again, the Mavs without Luca and Kyrie,
Hmm.
and some other guys, right? But like just as a whole, that's kind of something to look out for. Where if you can get, again, we've talked about it, if you can get a version of Jamal Murray that's similar to what you got in the playoffs in the past, not last season, right? But in the past before that, combined with what you're going to get from Jokic and some of these other guys, then you do have a chance, right? Like, not that they're going to be automatically picked at this point to come out, but now that they've kind of stabilized, at least for now, of course it could change. They're the 4 seed right now, with a chance to continue to go up. Like they're only a game and a half, or yeah, game and a half back from the Grizzlies, and then 2.5 back from the Rockets. So, I mean, just from that perspective, I mean, they could possibly go on a run. It still feels like they still need an additional thing. But, again, considering Gordon has missed a lot of time, Jamal Murray hasn't played that well. Like, again, that's kind of the helpful piece about the Westbrook factor, right? Is that he's come in, he's played very well, and he's helped them out and given them a lot of energy, a lot of production. And it's kind of put the Nuggets in a much better spot than they were earlier in the season, right? They still don't really get up a lot of threes. They're still primarily an offensive oriented team, so clearly far from perfect. But at the very least, it feels better than it felt earlier in the season, where it just kind of looked like this might just be like a bad year. Like now they're fourth in offense, and then defensively, yeah, they're 18th, so they're still below average. But it feels like we're getting a better version of this team now compared to earlier in the year. Again, still flawed, but the Jamal Murray piece is huge because if you get that, then you'll have a chance, I think.
Yeah, I think it gives you a ton of confidence, especially during this stretch when I think you need wins and they're so critical.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think them being in that 4 to 3 range, I think is probably the most ideal thing for them.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we know they're not going to get number one. I think it's unlikely they also get number two. But being that 4 seed, I think might be sneaky elite because I think they could be a disruptor come playoff time. If their play continues to get better and better.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just think, they're probably playing the long game, which I like. And yeah, there's a lot of pressure, I think, on Jamal Murray to return to his former self. Because you're getting a lot of good play from some other guys, like you talked about. Russ has been playing out of his freaking mind. It's crazy. And then you also have other guys who are giving you solid contributions, and then obviously Jokic is playing insane ball as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I think you have the majority of the pieces to I'm gonna say probably get back to the Western Conference Finals. I think that's probably their ceiling at the moment. I would need to see what Jamal Murray looks like in the playoffs to make a stronger indication. But yeah, their play throughout the last 10 games has been pretty solid. 7-3. That's pretty solid. So I think they need to continue that. As long as they stay above the Clippers and around the Memphis range, I think they'll be A-OK. And I think we'll be
Yeah.
seeing them go back to the Western Conference Finals.
If they can get to top 4, then I think that's a good spot. And again, like there's the potential to continue to climb if they can push even further.
Mm-hmm.
Which again, there's a chance to, just because of the fact that you have Jokic, and again, there's an opportunity for them to get healthy and continue to improve. Because again, like Gordon has not played a whole lot recently, and he just came back, and even then, like he's playing, like in a limited role off the bench. So just kind of something to look out for, right?
Yeah.
Then, last but not least, we actually had a trade. We actually did have a trade. This is what, the fourth one this season, right? Which, again, kind of interesting considering how most of them have been primarily before the trade deadline. And again, not like a huge trade, but it was a trade, right? Obviously. So it wasn't Jimmy Butler. But it was Charlotte Hornets center Nick Richards, right? He will be going to the Phoenix Suns along with a 2025 Nuggets second round pick for Josh Okogie and 3 second round picks, right? So in other words, the Suns net gave up 2 seconds, got one back, right? For Nick Richards, and then or for Josh Okogie, and then everything else kind of factors into place. So for the Suns, you got a center. Sounds like at some point he'll start. He's not available yet, right? So probably by the time we record next episode, he'll have played a game or so. But again, he's been averaging starting for the Hornets, he's been giving them a double-double, 65 from the field. Again, we've talked about him before, right? Because we talked about him as a possible backup center option for some of these teams, right? I know you weren't necessarily super high on him, as like a center. Again, he's better than I guess what they had. He's better than I guess Mason Plumlee. Nurkic doesn't even play anymore, although I think he's been under the weather. But before that, they just kind of took him out of the rotation. You got Iguodala, who's been fine as a rookie. Does it solve like all of the Suns' problems? Probably not. Still kind of, I think, a ways away from where they would probably like to be, right, as a championship team. But at least, you got a guy who's a center. You didn't have to give up a ton, right? Like, because Okogie had been playing more. And that was the guy that, if you were going to make a trade and not give up like a key rotational piece, like they gave him that contract specifically to trade him. So now they traded him and you brought in a guy, who again, probably is better as his backup big. But again, he's better than what they have. He's a decent athlete. He can get you some rebounds and, finish inside. So probably offensively closer to what you would like if you're the Suns. Defensively, I mean, he's like mediocre, right? Like, not really like a guy that's like, a great defensive big. But you weren't really getting that anyways, right? Like, it's an upgrade at that position. So solid acquisition for the Suns. Does it really change my outlook on them? Not really. But, again, it makes the team, I would say, better. Just because of the fact that you went from having, the worst center rotation in the league to probably like the second worst center rotation in the league.
Yeah, I mean, it's an upgrade. It's not a great upgrade, but it does make you better, so you can't really hate on it. I don't think there's any way that you could, rate this trade below a C.
Mhm.
Like you said, Richards, he'll give you some more than what you already had for sure. And yeah, being the worst center room in the NBA, probably not a recipe for a championship. So you'll pretty much take anything that you could get. You pretty much got rid of Josh Okogie, who wasn't really doing much for you. Like, he has his moments defensively, but he just didn't really fit the mold of the team, obviously. And then the second round picks, it is what it is. But you know, I'll say it's a good trade, because
Yeah.
like you said, you get a somewhat of an upgrade at the center position. So
Yeah, I mean, like that's the main thing is like they just need more of those type of guys that can do some of the dirty work. Because when you watch them play, like it can get really ugly. Where like I don't know if it's just that they just kind of give up or whatever. Like
mhm.
before this game, they played against the Hawks who were missing some guys, and then Onyeka Okongwu has like a 2020 game off the bench, right? And like they're just kind of helpless, where they're just giving up offensive rebounds, giving up easy shots at the rim, and the Suns don't really get to the rim a whole lot anyway. So like
Mm-mm.
again, he can probably help them there. Now, again, they're not really like a team that's like, we're throwing lobs to bigs, right? Like, I mean, they don't really have any anyways, but like, that's not really what those guys necessarily do. But, again, got to take a chance on a guy who's better than what they had. It's just, again, now you can kind of baby steps, see what it looks like with, an actual playable center that can do something around the basket. And you just kind of go from there. Again, they're going to have to do more. How much more can they realistically do? I don't know. I mean, like, because with Nurkic, he's not an expiring. So you'd have to attach more assets in order to get off of him. And they just don't have any more, right? Like, I mean, at this point, they don't really have much other than, the 2031 first, if I'm not mistaken. And then,
Yeah.
like, maybe, I guess, the 1 second or 2 seconds that they have, something like that. So, I mean, they tried. They're doing something, but, this is still, I think, ideally not how you would have wanted this big three to work out. Because again, now we're basically a season and a half's worth of a sample size that shows that it just doesn't work, right? It just doesn't work. Now Bradley Beal doesn't even start. He probably doesn't care, but I mean, like just as a whole, again, from a Suns perspective, good job. From a Hornets perspective, I mean, again, we knew that they were going to be sellers anyways. Like they're what? They're 9-28. So they're not a very good team. I mean, again, they've had a horrible string of bad luck in terms of health, but we knew that was going to happen anyways, right? And even then, their ceiling was probably not much more than like maybe play-in team, right? Like something like that. So that's kind of the issue there. So it's, again, they're a team where at the deadline, I'm curious if they move any of these guys. I mean, they just did with Nick Richards, and they got back seconds, which is nice. But just as a whole, you probably expect probably similar moves like this from Charlotte, maybe where there are guys where they could probably just sell and get some assets. I don't think it'll be any of the main guys, right? But it could easily be one of the guys off the bench, and players like that. So, again, didn't really. I mean, we knew there was kind of rumors about guys like that were kind of on the Suns' radar, and he's been a guy that's been in rumors of like, yeah, teams are looking for this type of player. Most of them were looking at him as a backup center, right? But for the Suns, they got to have him as a starting center. So, yeah, again, it's fine. I mean, the Hornets have other bigs, right? I mean, like Mark Williams now will probably get even more minutes if he
Good.
can stay healthy.
Yeah.
And then the other guys, what, like Musa Diabate, right? That's pretty much it. But just, again, like this is the type of stuff that Charlotte probably should be doing. It's kind of just getting ready to sell on some of these guys that have relatively small contracts. See if you can get anything back, and then just kind of go from there. So again, probably win-win, I guess. I mean, I guess maybe.
Yeah, I would say it's a win-win. You get picks. I think that's the good part. You're acquiring more assets because I think the more assets that you have, no matter what, if it's first or second round picks, I think it'll help you in the long run.
Yeah, exactly. So again, Charlotte's not in a position to win a ton of games this season.
Mm-mm.
So, I mean, now that they're kind of healthy, I mean, there's not a world where like they go on a run and then all of a sudden, boom, we're back in the play. Like, that's not happening. But, again, you get a chance to kind of see what your core looks like. And, again, probably still not going to do a whole lot, but just from that perspective, it's fine. But I think for Phoenix, they got, I guess, the better end just because you got some type of player that you wanted. It's just, again, is it going to matter a whole lot? I mean, maybe, probably not, though. I mean, I think actually in one of those Charlotte games, he was the guy that the Suns were having a problem with because they just didn't have anybody, big enough or physical or athletic enough to really do anything. But, so now they got one of those guys. But I feel like ideally, he's probably a backup center on a good team, probably not a starting center.
Agreed. Yeah, that's the problem that I have. If you
Yeah,
want me
like
to be truthful.
yeah, like there were other teams that had been mentioned at times, like say the Knicks. Like if he's your backup center on the Knicks, that's pretty cool, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not like the ideal scenario, but like it's better than nothing,
Mm-hmm.
right? But as a starting center, not as big on that. I mean, but again, what choice do the Suns really have? You got a guy and didn't really have to give up much of anything. So, like, am I out on them? Kind of, yeah, pretty much. Not quite as out as Philly, but I mean out from the perspective of I don't see them doing a whole lot. Does this get them close to OKC? Like,
No,
just no.
I'm out on them until they make a serious move. Let's
Right.
just say that.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. And again, 3 weeks away from the deadline. So, in terms of news and rumors going around, according to Mark Stein, Bruce Brown likely to be dealt. Raptors also showcasing Chris Boucher ahead of the trade deadline. Yeah, because actually, those guys, they played in a game against the Warriors, right, where they ended up winning that game, and Chris Boucher was a big contributor in that win, right? He's, kind of, I guess, like a stretch big, kind of an energy guy. And then obviously Bruce Brown, he was a part of the championship Nuggets team. He just hasn't played a whole lot. I mean, like, if you look at his numbers, he's not really done a whole lot. He had knee surgery in the offseason, so he's probably just kind of getting his legs back under him. I think he could be a guy that if you're a playoff team, he'd be a nice addition, right? Like a Bruce Brown. It's just the contract. He makes basically $23 million. So in order to get to that number, I mean, you'd have to, it's not nothing. Like you'd have to give up at least like a couple of pieces. Like say if you're a team like, I don't know, the Lakers, right? Like you'd have to put in like a Rui and then some additional piece, right? Like, like, do you want to do that for Bruce Brown? You could argue yes, or you could argue no. It's just, the matter of that's kind of the issue there, right? Like, that's why, like, say, when he signed that deal with the Pacers in the offseason, a lot of teams were probably like, geez, because if he was like a mid-level guy, that'd be perfect. But as a $20+ million guy, that's an expiring, that's a little bit more difficult to get to. But, for him, we got to see him be a little bit healthier just because he's barely played this season. So if he can be healthy and contribute, it's a good addition, I think, to a team. Boucher, I mean, again, if you need a backup big, then that's fine, right? And he's a stretch big too, so that's kind of so that's a nice thing to have as well. But again, like the Raptors have pieces that they could realistically move. So I mean, like even like a Kelly Olynyk, right? Like he's a guy that's I think we've heard has been on teams' radars, right? Because that's just another guy that probably shouldn't really be on a rebuilding team right now. So this is the time where we're going to start hearing more rumors like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing. I think all three of those guys are pretty quality role players. They'll be great on contending teams. Just like they're kind of just sitting there wasting away on these on Toronto because of the position that they're in. But yeah, I think all of them can give you productive, solid, winning minutes. On a contender. So I don't mind them being available at all.
Yeah, exactly. And then, according to Jake Fisher, the Warriors are eyeing mid-tier bigs, right? So he mentioned names, such as, again, like the names that we've heard before, right? Like guys like, Vucevic, right? Guys like, John Collins, Kelly Olynyk as well, right? Kind of like the lower, on the lower end. Guys like that. Again, like, Valanciunas. These are names that are going to continue to be, tossed around. He specifically more so mentioned Olynyk and Vucevic. I think because those are guys that are stretch bigs, right? And they haven't really had that type of player in Golden State. And I think it's probably not likely that Golden State makes a big move. It's just more likely that I think a smaller move. You even heard it from the guys in Golden State, right? Where they were basically all of the mindset of like, we're not going to mortgage the future for whatever, right? Like we'll make the deal, we'll get a deal right when the time comes. But like they basically were like, we know what we're doing, I guess. So um again, if they get those guys, they're better, right? It would be nice to see like what a stretch big looks like next to Steph because they haven't had a whole lot of those, right? I guess Bielicha, I think, was one during the title year, in 2022. But what was the other guy's name? Jamichael Green, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
sort of that one year, but he didn't really pan out for them.
Yeah.
So they haven't had those type of players. So it'd be interesting to see, just to see, that team with a little bit more spacing, because I think you can kind of see like none of their bigs can shoot. So it's kind of a problem where, late in games, they just don't really have enough offensively to work with. But as we talked about, like, if they really want to be like a serious title contender, they need to do more than that. But, again, I don't see them realistically giving up a ton, to do much. To get to a point where like, yeah, they're a little bit better. I don't see that. So I think a smaller deal is probably more likely. But, again, it's kind of like with the Phoenix thing for me where it's like they'll be better, but they won't get to the level of the top teams.
Yeah, I think one of those guys would be helpful. Like you said, floor spacing would definitely help, and I don't even think it would just help Steph. I think it would help the whole squad in general. Helps
Right.
Wiggins get more
That's
buckets.
the least of their problems.
Oh yeah, 100%. Kaminga, I guess, more buckets, but yeah, they gotta do something. I need to see them make a move. If they don't make a deadline move, I'm gonna be very pissed off because I think they're
Yeah.
one of the teams that should definitely be at the top of the list in terms of
Yeah.
priority.
Which one would you prefer, Olynyk or Vucevic?
I mean, what are their contracts looking like? I'm sure Vucevic makes
Vucevic is
more.
like 20. Yeah, Vucevic is like at 21. Olynyk's at like 10 or 11 or whatever. Like, I mean, Olynyk makes less money. So, that's where I could see a scenario where it's like Vucevic might be too rich for our blood, so let's go and get Kelly Olynyk. Like, I
Right.
could see that.
Yeah, that
But I
was
feel
my
like
question.
Vucevic is probably the one they prefer because he is better. You know
Yeah,
what I
he's
mean?
10
Like,
times better, in my
yeah,
opinion.
like, and
And I think
yeah,
Vucevic
and
has
he's
had a
got,
better season this year.
yeah.
He's kind of rehabbed his value a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess the question for the Bulls is, are they actually going to do it? Because the thing is that the pick is what, top 10 protected, right? And they're already kind of in that, bottom 10 mix anyways with the guys they have. There's probably not a world where they move out of that top 10, unless one of the teams ahead of them just kind of falls apart. So, I mean, with the way the Bulls operate, I could see them just not doing anything and just be like, maybe we'll revisit it in the summer or something like that, and just be okay with being like an 11 seed or something like that, or 10 seed.
Right.
I don't know, but for them, the thing is, those guys have played so well that if I were them, I would ask for more, because I think realistically in the summer you probably could have gotten guys like Vucevic or Levine for way less, right? We know with Levine that was definitely true, but now why not ask for more? Because I mean, like again, like you're not amazing with them, so I mean, you might as well see if you can kind of fleece a team and see if a team is going to be dumb enough to trade like a bunch of stuff to get one of those guys.
Right. Right. Yeah, I
Not
agree
that
with
you
you.
shouldn't try to acquire those guys. I'm just saying if I'm the Bulls, I would, again, I mean, that's what I would do. So,
I agree with you.
well, that's pretty much it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on OKC Cavs. Let us know your thoughts on the Celtics. Let us know your thoughts on all the teams we've discussed. Right. Again, if you leave a comment, we'll read it in the beginning of the episode. Again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Helps the channel grow. Helps us know that we're doing a good job. We'll see you in the next episode.